Maybe that's what makes you so good, is because you think you're terrible, so you're always working at it.
I don't know about that.
So what happens? You get a sign that we're starting, do you?
We're live now. Hello, everybody.
Oh.
Ah.
Thank you so much for joining us before the London Chamber Orchestra concert later tonight. I'm very excited to see it and to see you performing. If you have any questions for the two musicians here, Karen and Meyrick, then please do put them in the comments, and you can ask them, speak to them. But Karen, how was it recording this concert and being a part of it?
Well, I'm sure by this stage you're used to hearing musicians say that actually when you finally get to play with your colleagues again, it's very, very much more emotional than you even anticipated it being. I mean, you know, you've maintained your practice as best you can throughout both lockdowns, and then you finally step in the room and you hear your colleagues tune up and warm up. And then you play a fabulous piece of music together. And honestly, there's not words to describe it. That is what we're there for. That's why we carry on. I carry on so that I can hear my colleagues and keep raising my game, and because I love the music. So it's blooming brilliant.
And Meyrick, how was it for you recording the concert, being a part of it?
Well, all those things that Karen just said, plus the fact we're both woodwind players, and woodwind players aren't really meant, woodwind instruments aren't really meant to be played on their own. You know, we're part of a group. And so to be part of a pack is far more satisfying than just playing on your own. And of course, we've all been practicing like mad at home, doing our scales and arpeggios. I'm saying that for any students who might be listening. And long notes. We've been doing all that stuff. But of course, it's just not the same as actually fitting with other people, which is what we do.
And I was wondering, did it feel any different, or did you find you played in a different way, knowing that it was being streamed rather than the audience being in the room? Did it change in the way that you are actually playing the music, or once you're playing and you're with the rest of the orchestra, does it just feel like it always does?
May I, Meyrick? Is that all right? Can I dive in? I have to say, we started off a rehearsal. We had some prep rehearsals in a different venue to St. John Smith Square. And speaking personally, but I think I speak on behalf of all of us, the distancing thing, oh boy, did it take a long time for us to lock in. I mean, it really did. And when we got to St. John Smith Square, in fact, we spaced ourselves yet further. And there was something about the acoustic there that lent itself much more readily. And the reason I say all of that is that since lockdown and all the social distancing, it's a terribly difficult thing trying to breathe in synchronization with another wind player, or, you know, all the little gestures you do, you know, even anything, occasionally you can hear the person next door to you in normal times take a little breath, and you know where to put the chord then, you know, all those things have gone. I've forgotten your question now, Jess. What was the original question? I've gone off in a horrible diversion.
No, how did it feel not having the audience in the room, or did you play differently to camera?
Well, we just tried to create the feeling of it being a performance. You know, we knew that we couldn't be there. We didn't do any editing. There was no such thing as, we didn't do all of that. So I think we did 2 or 3 run-throughs of every movement that we played. And yeah, so how did it feel? We just had to try and make it feel like a performance. And it was doesn't feel right. But we played for each other, played for ourselves, and we knew it was being videoed, and that switched on a bit of adrenaline, which is what we count on.
We have some questions here from some watchers, listeners, audience. When did you both start playing your current instruments? Meyrick?
Well, I was taken to a concert when I was about 7 years old, and I came away thinking I want to play the bassoon, but I wasn't big enough. Really, it's a mistake to start the bassoon too young. About 11 is about right. And some people might remember there was a bassoon player called Archie Camden, who was a big star at the time. I mean, he was like James Galway, really. He was a household name. And I went to one of his lecture recitals when I was about 8 years old. And at the end, he said, "Any questions?" And I put my hand up and I said, "When can I start the bassoon?" And he made me come to the front of the room and he looked at my hands and he said, "You can start when you're 11. So I had my first bassoon lesson on my 11th birthday.
Oh, wow. And it says, were these the first instruments you played, and why did you finally make the decision on what to play? So was that the first instrument you played, the bassoon?
No, I started on the piano and the violin, and then I played the viola a bit. So that was when I was very young, because my mother was a clarinet teacher and a piano teacher, so we had music in the house. So I started pretty early on those things. But bassoon was always my aim. You know, whenever I was struggling away with the violin or the viola, what I really wanted to do was play the bassoon.
And Karen, what about you?
Oh, mine's quite similar. I'll try and keep it quick. I played the piano as well, first of all, and the recorder. And my mum, who's a professional pianist, and she was accompanying a flute player in our home one day. And I said, "Oh, I love the sound of that." And the flute player said, "Here, try it." And obviously, this is pre-COVID. And anyway, a few years pre-COVID. And I tried it. I couldn't do anything. And she said, "Oh, imagine you're blowing across the top of a milk bottle, you know." And I thought about that and I blew across. And she said, and then, you know, and I got a note. And on my 10th birthday, a flute turned up. And I think we'd hired it. I think we rented it. And I found that basically the recorder fingerings worked on the flute, and that was just me. I was off and going, and I at that point I found it so easy I couldn't see what the fuss was about. It's only in subsequent years that I've realized how damn hard it is. I wish it felt that easy.
And somebody else has asked, have you discovered any new hobbies during lockdown?
Oh, Meyrick, after you.
Well, I've had more time to do the things that I enjoy doing outside music, like digging my garden and going for walks. And I've done some very long walks. I walked around Cornwall, and I've had a garden full of vegetables because I've had time to do it properly. And normally, you know, I stick the vegetables in the ground and then I don't see them for months. And by the time I come back to them, it's disaster, you know. So I've had time to do that sort of thing, but I wouldn't have thought that was a new hobby. Well, I've been trying to improve my Welsh language skills, so I've been doing that every day, and I've done a few jigsaws on rainy days. That's about it, really.
And what about you, Karen?
Well, maybe now's the time to go public with something. I just wish I'd thought about this before and got the permission of, I'm now going to go public about something very exciting. When the London Chamber Orchestra, this time last year with Meyrick, we were just fresh back from our Far East tour, which was quite the most exceptional tour any of us have ever been on, in that there was so much free time and we were in such an exotic part of the planet. And every morning there, a group of girls got together and exercised. And we were headed and led and tutored and cajoled by one of our fantastic cellists, Jolie Coos. And we became known as the Sweaty Betties, I'm afraid. Well, anyway, come March and lockdown, the last concert that was held in London happened to be Jolie and I were together in the Queen Elizabeth Hall. And she said, "You know what we're going to do? Let's get the Betties going again." And we are now in week 36 of 8:15, 6 mornings a week, about anything from 4 to 14 of us, men and women, all friends and musicians, meet online to do a combination of Pilates and high intensity interval training. And I have never exercised in my life, and I'm now into 36 weeks of 6 days a week of it, thanks to the Sweaty Betties.
Wow.
Go girls!
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And they said, somebody said, has asked, did you enjoy having a bit of time off during lockdown, or did you just desperately miss music? Doesn't sound like you've had much time off, Karen. 8:15 exercise classes every day. But did you desperately miss music or enjoy having some time off?
I went for the first 2 or 3 weeks, maybe even 4. It was a fabulous moment of guilt-free rest. And then when it kicked in that I needed to be heard on my flute, and I wanted to be heard and I needed to play, it kicked in hard. That's the truth. How about you, Meyrick?
Well, it was a bit odd for me, really, because I used to be in one of the big symphony orchestras, and I left that about 10 years ago to do more teaching and things. And at the beginning of lockdown, I just started a year back with my old orchestra doing a cover for a colleague for a sabbatical. He was taking a sabbatical. And I just got going playing in the symphony orchestra again, which is a different technique, you know. And I did about 2 months with them, you know, doing concerts and things. And then I had a full diary of stuff with them, and it all just stopped instantly. It stopped on March the 8th. And that was the day I caught COVID. So I went down with that. So the first few weeks of lockdown were pretty awful because I wasn't playing, and I had lots of playing in my diary, and I was ill in bed. So it was a bit of a shock. It is nice to have some time, but of course it's open-ended. And normally when you have time off as a musician, you might take 3 weeks off or something, and you can pace yourself to when you're coming back. But this, goodness knows when we'll be back. You know, it's marvelous doing this stuff with London Chamber Orchestra, and that's kept us going. It's something to practice for. But apart from that, you know, it's very difficult to know why you're practicing. You know, you're in a room doing your scales and arpeggios and studies and learning a few pieces. But it's difficult to have an end in sight. And normally there's never enough time to practice. You've got a concert coming up and it's a mad panic getting everything ready for that particular concert. But now it isn't. There isn't that imperative. So it's different from that point of view. So it really, what would be nice is to know when we can be back playing full time. And of course, nobody can possibly say that. So that's what's so odd about it. It's a bit in limbo, you know?
Yeah, I think that I agree, being a musician too, the open-endedness of everything is quite difficult to have something to aim for. And as soon as there is a concert in the diary, it's like a little gem or a ray of sunshine, just a bit of hope, and then it might disappear and then it might come back, but we can just hope.
Yeah.
Somebody else has asked, what have been the highlights for the both of you in your years playing with the LCO? What have been your highlights?
Go on, Karen.
Well, the first time I played with LCO was my first professional date ever. I had actually that day signed on to what we used to call the dole. Jess, you wouldn't have a clue what that was. I'd finished being a student, and it was unemployment benefit. And I had actually been to Brixton to sign on, that's what we called it, to claim my unemployment benefit. And I had I didn't have a sofa where I was renting. And I remember sitting cross-legged on the floor. I don't know what I was doing, reading or something. And the phone rang, and my phone was on the floor. And it was Chris Warren Green. And he said, "Oh, hello. It's Chris Warren Green here. I don't suppose you've got your diary there, have you?" And I thought, well, I know, yeah, I've got it, but there's nothing in it. And he said, "Would you like to come and make some recordings with us?" And the very first thing I recorded with them was Mendelssohn Italian Symphony. And to say that it was like having electrodes attached to you and being plugged into the mains would be an understatement in terms of speed, excitement, and velocity. And I know that Chris says he still claims that the last movement of LCO's Mendelssohn Italian Symphony is the fastest recording available. I've certainly never played it. Anyway, that's one memory. And then another memory is simply every day of our tour, our month-long tour to Southeast Asia this time last year. for the camaraderie, incredible places we went to, and getting to know our colleagues better, for the Bettys, for making music with local musicians, for meeting wonderful young musicians out there, for playing in an orphanage in Cambodia, playing in a children's hospital in Cambodia. Those stand out as highlights. Different, but they are off the cuff, my highlights.
That sounds incredible. What about you, Meyrick?
Well, Karen, going back to the Italian symphony, it's a well-known fact that the speed of the last movement is controlled by how fast the flutes can play it. So the fact that Chris took it that speed means that you and Christine must have been able to play it incredibly fast. Otherwise, you wouldn't have dared do it. So there we are. But I've had some wonderful times with the LCO over the years generally, because I've been doing it ever since Chris took it on in the mid-1980s. So we've made a lot of CDs. We've had some fabulous concerts. I think I mentioned in my profile thing, we played in La Scala, Milan, which was just extraordinary. And the thing about Chris is that he always pulls something out of the bag. There's always something extraordinary that's going to happen. And we were recording one piece, I remember, and he suddenly said, "This is terribly boring. Let's play it double speed." So we did, and it worked much better double speed than the speed we were doing it. But recently, of course, this tour that Karen mentioned of Southeast Asia was just amazing. I've been touring for a very long time, and I've been to most of the regular places lots of times, but I've never been to any of these countries before, and I never expected to. And so that was a real thrill, and it's completely different to anywhere else I've been. The food was fantastic, and the people we met were absolutely fabulous. And one of the most extraordinary things for me was that we flew out to Laos, and we arrived in sort of early evening, and a group of us went down to go out for an early evening drink down by the river. And we sat there at this bar, and we realized it was the river Mekong. And now I was a youngish kind of guy when the Vietnam War was going on. And one of the things that I said to one of the younger players was that had I been American, I would have been conscripted to fight in the Vietnam War. And of course, the Mekong River was on the news all the time about terrible disasters going on there. So suddenly to go there all that time later was amazing. And of course, a lot of the younger players, they'd heard of the Vietnam War, but they didn't have a personal connection with it like the people of my age did. So that was really extraordinary experience altogether. And going around all those places was amazing. Yeah, that's definitely the high point.
And with tonight's program, where you can kind of bring it's amazing how you talk about, both of you talk about the kind of sense of collective with the other musicians and getting to know them as people as well as players. And I think whenever I've seen the LCO perform, I think you can really feel that connection in the music making. It goes, it just shows in spades, and it's so inspiring to see, because for me that's what music is about that sense of togetherness and collectivity. And it's why these times are so difficult, because we have neither of those things. But I wanted to ask you a bit about the music you're playing this evening. I'd never heard of the first piece, the Louise Farrenc, and I'm so glad that it's been a gem that's been kind of discovered. She's incredible, completely radical and fantastic. I thought particularly windwriting. So I wanted to ask you how playing that piece was, whether you'd played it before, and whether you could feel her kind of radical nature and personality in the music.
Have you played it before, Meyrick?
No, I've never even heard of it. I'd never heard of it.
I'm glad you said that. I didn't dare say that, but that's exactly the same for me.
Yeah, I mean, it starts off sounding like Beethoven, but then there's all sorts, as you said, Jess, there are radical bits of writing in there that suddenly leap out at you. And of course, it was a time when you had to be fairly conservative, and it is fairly straightforward harmonically. But there are odd little quirks, aren't there, Karen? You must have noticed the same.
I did a bit of homework this evening. You'll be glad to hear. And one of the things that I found out about her. Sorry, Meyrick. This doesn't directly follow on from what you just said, but I've just got to share this with everyone. Apparently, she was most famous for being a pianist, Louise Farrenc. Actually, she wasn't born Farrenc. She was born Jean-Louise Dumas, and she married Aristide Farrenc. And in fact, they founded Farrenc Publishers, which were the most famous publishers in France for 40 years. But anyway, she was first and foremost a pianist. And she was one of the top profs at the Paris Conservatoire for 30 years. She wasn't known as a composer. Anyway, upon the first performance of her nonette, which is what you're going to hear this evening, such was its reception, people thought it was fabulous. It caused a sensation. Do you know what the Paris Conservatory apparently did? They finally raised her pay to match that of her male colleagues. Boom.
She demanded it. And she was the only woman to be a professor in the whole of that century at the Paris Conservatoire, and it's unbelievable to hear. You think that really wasn't that long ago, and thank goodness for composers and women like that demanding those things. And how was the piece to play? Was it well written? Did it feel like anything you'd played before? Was it reminiscent of other pieces?
When I first listened to her, I did a bit of homework driving back on the motorway one evening from somewhere, and it struck me as being utterly gorgeous. Some little bit of Weber, a little bit of Humperdinck. Do you understand, Meyrick, why I say that? It's evocative of gorgeous scenes, lovely scenes with quirks. The only thing I have to say, I was a bit disappointed there's no great big flamboyant flute moment in there. In fact, the flute took rather a small role, so I was personally a bit disappointed. But it's a gem.
She was married to a flute player, wasn't she? She was married to a flute player.
Yeah, 10 years her senior. And what do we read into that then, Meyrick?
Well, I think it was a snub for her husband. She didn't. I mean, there's an oboe cadenza in there, and no flute one, which must have created havoc around the breakfast table. That's all I can say. But one of the things that occurred to me is, as orchestral players, we don't play that many different composers. I mean, probably sort of 25, 30 composers as regular people, and we get to know them really well. If it's Dvorak or Schubert or Bruckner or Brahms, we know their style really well. And you might be playing a piece of Brahms and you suddenly think, oh, that's not right. That must be a misprint because it's not what Brahms would have written. But when you come across a new composer of any age, it's not going to be the same as any of the others. So when we were playing her stuff, it wasn't the same as anybody else. And I once played on a series of records called Contemporaries of Haydn, and we recorded symphonies of composers who were at the same time as Haydn, but not nearly as well known. So people like Dittersdorf and Molter, and there were all sorts of people, and a lot of them are forgotten. And they were really nice pieces. They were great, but they weren't Haydn, they weren't Mozart, they weren't Beethoven. They were different. And that's the thing, is playing somebody like Farrenc, it's not going to be the same as Weber or Humperdinck or whoever else. It's always going to be slightly different, which is what's so great about playing new composers. So I always welcome it when I see a name I haven't heard before, because there are lots of fabulous composers who are never played.
Yeah, I was so pleased you're playing it. No, go ahead, Karen.
No, sorry. I'm sure people I'd love to ask you some questions, Jess, but anyway, perhaps that's not the idea. But, it was fantastic playing with double bass. I mean, I don't get to play with double bass. And we have the fantastic Stacey Wharton, and my God, what a fantastic bass part it is, actually. And that was a particular joy for me, I have to say.
One of the audience members has asked, they've said that they're not familiar with any of the works in tonight's concert. What should they look out for as a highlight? Not the flute solo in the Farronk, unfortunately.
Yeah, because you'll be looking all evening, alas. Meyrick, that's one for you.
Well, I think one of the things is that Pip Eastop very bravely decided to do it on a natural horn, and you know, that's a wall of death, really. And he did fabulously, and it's incredibly hard. So, I mean, for me, hearing him negotiate those two pieces on the hand horn was extraordinary. I mean, I expect superb and faultless playing from all my colleagues, but to do it on the hand horn really is an extra challenge, you know.
And
We'll look
towards
out.
the end of the piece, there are some hair-raising passages of virtuosity from Cleo Gould, who was leading us on that occasion. Hair-raising. I mean, triplets at super fast speed, and that comes from nowhere. And suddenly there's this kind of buzzing hive of bees coming from one person, and it's Cleo going absolutely mental with this virtuoso break from nothing. That's something to watch out for towards the end of the whole piece.
We'll all be watching.
I was going to, Jess, I was going to ask you something, because the Farronk piece is in E flat, and one of the things I've done an awful lot of is I've played with alto saxophones when the piece is in E flat, because you can just read the E flat horn part. And I wondered if you've done anything like that. Have you played any of the Mozart serenades or wind quintets or anything like that? Because the alto saxophone works absolutely perfectly in that.
It does, and I think some of its timbre and sound brings something different, but it's also able to sit in the sound that should have been occupied by the horn or whatever instrument it would have been. But I've never done it. It's something I would really love to do, actually, but I never have. But I hope to in the future.
Well, I've got a friend of mine arranged all the Beethoven symphonies for my woodwind department when I was running the woodwind department down in Cardiff at the Royal Welsh. And I had saxophones in my department, but I didn't have French horns in my department. They were part of the brass, so I couldn't timetable them very easily. And also the saxophones got a bit bored with playing saxophone music all the time, so they played all the Beethoven symphonies on usually alto saxophones, but sometimes you've got a tenor in there, and it worked absolutely brilliantly. So and they had a great time, because most of them had never played the music before. And
you can learn so much from it.
Yeah, and it gave them something to do, and I didn't have to listen to endless saxophone quartets, which are very nice, but I do like a change.
Oh, I'll have to see if I can. I'd love to do that. I'll have to see if I can find the scores.
Oh.
Well, maybe we'll have to see what we can do. Perhaps there's a germ of a project.
There we are.
Yeah.
Well, another question. What would be your 3 desert island discs, or failing that, a piece you could listen to or perform every day for the rest of your life and be happy? It's a big question.
Oh my God, how many questions were in there? Can we do them one at a time? It's a bit late in the day.
Or you could choose one. 3, either your 3 desert island discs, or a piece you could listen to or perform every day for the rest of your life and still be happy.
Oh God. Okay, I'm taking option A, please. Menu A, 3 desert island discs. Do you know, I've never ever thought about that. And I'm going with every single note of the Brahms Requiem, followed by the entire album, Kind of Blue, Miles Davis, followed by any album by the Carpenters. Those are my 3 desert island discs off the top of my head.
What about you, Meyrick?
Well, the piece I could play every day is Beethoven's 6th Symphony, because it's the most cheerful piece that's ever been written. And funnily enough, my colleague Gordon Hunt, who of course is doing this concert as well, he and I were in the same orchestra together for an incredible number of years. And I remember doing a long tour where we were all tired and hungry and fed up. And as soon as Beethoven 6, as soon as it started, you immediately felt good and rejuvenated. It's the most life-affirming piece. So that would be the piece I could play over and over and over again. But you see, the odd thing about Desert Island Disc is I think all musicians, I mean, all of us, we have the music running around in our head instantly. And as soon as Karen, for example, mentioned Brahms' Requiem, I heard it because it's in there. So it's sort of programmed in, all this stuff. It's like we're our own MP3 player. We've got all this stuff programmed in. So I don't need to have a record of the Brahms Requiem. I can just sit down and hear it all. So I'm a bit like Karen. I probably wouldn't take classical records to a desert island because I've got them all inside. So I'd probably take something like the Eagles, or you know, something, or you know, a jazz one like Karen said, or some speech. I would probably take Under Milkwood or something like that. You know, because I don't need the music.
It's all in there. Somebody has asked Meyrick about your steam locomotive driving qualification. And
can you say that again? I just lost you.
Of course, somebody has asked about your steam locomotive driving qualification.
Oh, right.
That you're a fan of steam trains. Can you tell us about it?
Well, I mean, when I was growing up, we lived by a railway line, and it was all steam trains then. And I remember when the first diesels came in. So I've always been fascinated by steam trains, and I think my sons find this difficult to believe. But after school, in the village I was brought up in, I mean, all the boys from school went down to the railway station after school every day to look at the trains. I mean, it's what we did. And we didn't have computers. We had steam trains instead. And I've always been fascinated by them. And when I left the Philharmonia Orchestra, my leaving present from the orchestra was a course to drive a steam train. So I went and did that down in Tunbridge Wells, and I did the first couple of qualifications there. And then I went up to North Wales a couple of years later and did the rest. It was a pretty intensive course, and you have to learn everything. You have to learn how to oil the engine, how to light the fire. You crawl all over it. You get inside it. You go all over it, and you learn how it works. You're in the classroom with books and diagrams, and you learn exactly how the whole thing works. And then you get to drive it, and you spend a week driving it up down the line, and you have to be the fireman as well, which is much harder. Being the fireman is much tougher than being the driver. I think people became drivers when they became too old to be the fireman, and it was like being kicked upstairs, really. So that's how I got involved in that, and one of my sons has had a go at it as well. So that's an interest I have, and I think an awful lot of guys of my age are fascinated by steam trains because it was part of our growing up.
There's an amazing one near where I come from called the Lal Ratti. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it used to be my favourite day out, going to the steam train.
Oh yeah, fantastic, yeah. Oh, it's lovely, yeah, it's beautiful.
And Karen, we've heard that you might like to be a dinner lady. Is this true?
I could feel that coming. In fact, I realized I was suddenly getting butterflies in my stomach, and I was getting nervous because when LCO said, could I, can you throw into the mix of a bit of publicity you were doing, just a sentence of something to do with something that people wouldn't guess about you. And I just threw that at you, and I could see the way this conversation was going then. We were talking to Meyrick about being the steam train driver, and I thought, oh no, they're going to ask me about the fact that I've always wanted to be a dinner lady. Mainly because I've got some sort of perverse desire to dollop large ladles of wholesome home cooking into big bowls and serve it to hungry, appreciative, noisy, appreciative eaters. And it's just something I've always wanted to do. And I've as yet not managed it, with the exception of once on a flute course at a posh public boys' school. And we got to the end of the masterclass in the morning, and they donned a nylon cap and a blue nylon coat and some rubber gloves and gave me a huge ladle. And I was allowed to throw the custard at the sponge pudding of every participant on the course. And I was in heaven. So I'm sorry about that. I haven't got a qualification for being a dinner lady, but it is something I would enjoy being more regularly.
Maybe
You
you
do
could do it
realise,
for the
don't you?
LCO.
What did you say?
I was going to say.
Go ahead, Meyrick.
Sorry, I was going to say that there might be some real dinner ladies watching this, Karen, and they will pick you up on your technique of serving ice cream and mashed potato. You you just don't do it like that.
That's my overarm.
It's maybe something you could do for the LCO, Karen, at rehearsals. You could provide the meal.
Yeah, I was wondering if maybe I could do a job swap.
We have a couple more questions. When you were younger, were you planning to be a musician? Well, Karen wasn't. She was planning to be a dinner lady.
I'm sorry, Meyrick, to dive in. Forgive me, but it's my moment to say that I'm the fourth, if not the fifth. Sorry, Dad, if you're listening. I can never remember whether it's the fourth or the fifth generation of professional musicians in my family, and I'm very, very proud of that. Both my parents are professional musicians, and I grew up in a house that was brimming with music and people practicing and listening to music. And I can remember nothing else. I cannot remember a time when I just didn't presume that music was going to be at the core of my life. That's quite literally the truth. I can't remember a time when that wasn't the case.
Wow. What about you, Meyrick? Is it something you grew up with or something that you realised?
Well, yes. I mean, I was a colleague of Karen's father in the orchestra, and I've known Karen since she was a wee slip of a thing, and she would turn up with her flute, and always, she would talk about when she was, well, you were a teenager, weren't you, Karen? And and her ambition on the flute, and I thought that was fantastic. So I always knew that she would, I would end up being a colleague of hers, because that's the way things go. And one of the things you mentioned about the LCO is that we are all a group of friends. I mean, we all know each other tremendously well. We've all been working together for ages, so there's a great atmosphere. It's like a group of friends, really. And but about my own thing, well, as I say, about my mother, she wanted to be a clarinet player, but this was before the war, and she went to the Royal Academy of Music, where she was told she couldn't possibly be a clarinet player because she was a woman, and it just simply wasn't on. And so she did more on the piano, really, than the clarinet. So then the war happened, and after the war, she had me, and she became a mum and all that, and so she never got a chance to be a clarinet player. But the moment I took an interest in the bassoon, she kind of steered me in that direction, and she was very encouraging, and also a very harsh critic. She would listen to everything I did. She'd shout up the stairs and say, "Play that again." It wasn't good enough. So I had that, really. But I was determined to be a orchestral player. I used to go to a lot of concerts. I was brought up in Bristol, and I used to go and see the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, and I got to know some of the players, from a very young age, and I just wanted to do it. And it reminds me of listening to footballers, who grew up, they supported their team, and the one thing they wanted to do was play for the team. And it was similar for me, really. And in about 1966, I think it was, the Philharmonia Orchestra came to Bristol, a very rare visit from a London orchestra, and I went to see them, and I just thought, this is just fantastic. And I went home, and I said, one day I'm going to join that orchestra, and my parents laughed like drains, because they thought, what a stupid thing to say. But I did in the end. So it was a bit like the guy who goes to support Liverpool on the terraces and ends up playing for them. So that's how that happened with me.
That's such an amazing and quite moving way of thinking of it. I'd never really realised that it was a similar feeling, but I can imagine. I mean, I've never really been into sports myself, but I can imagine it's that same feeling of camaraderie and being amongst people and being able to share share things with people, whether it be joy or reflection through music, and being a part of the team. I think it's, if we could get other people to think like that across the country, it would be amazing.
Jess, can I just, I'm so horrified to hear that Meyrick's mother was told that she couldn't be a clarinetist. That couldn't possibly happen because she was a woman. My great grandmother was Winifred Cockerill, and she was the first female, she was the harpist. She was the first female in a London orchestra ever. And she was the harpist in the London Philharmonic Orchestra, and she was the only woman for a very long time. And yeah, I'm very proud to be able to say that about my great grandma.
When was that?
It's one of the things I stress.
Yeah,
talking to students, because a lot of my students are girls, and I point out that there were a few woodwind players, female woodwind players, who paved the way for everybody else. People like Thea King, Janet Craxton. You know, it wasn't a done deal at all. It was very difficult to become a woodwind player if you're a woman, and it's worth bearing that in mind, that it hasn't always been like it is now.
And we're to be grateful for the people like your family, Karen, who've been able to pave the way. I mean, I constantly feel grateful for the line of women and men, some men who have gone before, who have helped to pave the way. And that must be an incredible feeling to be related to somebody like that.
I feel very proud, for sure.
Well, I wish we could carry on talking, but it is now time to finish, as the concert is about to start. You can watch it on the LCO website, which is www.lco.co.uk, or it's also premiering here live on Facebook at 7:30. And if you'd like to comment on Facebook as you're watching, that would be great. And maybe some of the musicians will be watching and able to answer your questions or comment with your thoughts on the pieces. But thanks so much, Karen and Meyrick. It's been fascinating to talk to you, and I can't wait to watch your concert.
It's been a joy, Jess. I'd love to meet you, and I'd love to have asked you some questions. Thanks ever so much. You're a sweetheart.
Not at all.
Yes, thanks so much, Jess. It's been really good fun. Lovely. Great to talk to you.
Enjoy the concert.
Bye, Karen.
Enjoy.
Bye.